Boundaries of the Eora are the Hawkes River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders, and the members, I welcome everyone to the land of the Gadigal. I acknowledge the Gadigal people and the people of the lands that you are on, whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with these lands, our Mother Earth. Across this beautiful continent of ours, there are hundreds of nations, tribes, and clans existing here for over 60,000 years. This country's First Nations people are the oldest living culture of the world. And as we're all joined online, let us all remember and acknowledge the many warriors that created pathways for all of us, the ones recognised and the ones we've never heard of. My people have always listened and learned from each other, the environment, animals, elements, and our ancestors. We don't live in isolation of body, culture, spirit, land, and water, because we are one, for in our blood it runs. And we need to reflect upon the footsteps we're leaving to know where we're heading, shaping a society, a local government, a state, a country we can all be proud of. As we're all gathered virtually today, and you hear and learn from today's views, remember to reflect about my people's lived stories and our connection to the land, which were forever changed when we were erased from the view. My people lived in unison with this country for thousands of generations, learned from our ancient practices because we are still here. Think about the difference that you can make today that will become the milestones of the future, all our futures, so we can have one. Don't just say the words, but put them into action. And to give us all guidance and strength, let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I thank you all for joining us. I'm going to hand it back over to Miad to introduce everyone, but also I'd like you to all please, if you can, if you don't want to put it in the chat, it's okay, but just reflect about the clans lands that you're on or the tribes lands that you're on today, because the fact that you're living on these ancient lands and knowing who those local people traditionally were is an important part of some of the lessons that you're going to learn today, but some of the lessons we need to take with us into the future. So I thank you and I hope you enjoy the forum.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That was very beautiful. So before we get into the presentations, maybe I ask Cara and Alessandro to introduce yourself a little bit. I'm trying to see if Kieran is on the call as well. If he's and he may join us a little bit later. But Cara, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll go to Alessandro for the introduction.
Oh, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. What a wonderful welcome to country, Yvonne. Thank you so much for welcoming us into this space. So my name's Cara. I work at the University of Sydney. I do research on wildlife ecology and how native animals can survive essentially in our urban environments. And I'm speaking to you today from the Lower Blue Mountains. So this is Darug country. And I feel very lucky to live here, and my children absolutely love exploring the environment here, and being in lockdown, they are here and they are likely to interrupt at any time. So yeah, we're really lucky to live in this wonderful place, and we acknowledge the traditional owners here and of all of the lands for which we've collected data that I'll be presenting shortly. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Alessandro, do you want to go next?
Sure, Alessandro here. I'm a research coordinator at Macquarie University and assistant professor at UC Davis, University of California in the United States. I'm talking to you from the Watamatagal clan land of the Darug Nation. And thank you for having me. And I hope that it's going to be an interesting talk.
Thank you very much. Kieran, let me see if Kieran, are you on to do a bit of introduction?
Yeah, Budjeri Gamaru, everyone. My name's Kieran Dunn. I work for the Cooks River Alliance. I'm a Gumbaynggirr person from the north coast of New South Wales. I'm also an ecologist and 20 years of horticulture as well. So I'd just like to add a few aspects and angles to urban horticulture and biodiversity.
Thank you very much. That was great. Kara, are you able to share your screen, or you don't see that share a screen feature?
The host has to enable.
Okay, let me see if Karen can. Karen, if you hear me, can you, Karen is the host now. If you can either make Kara or myself host so I can hand it to Kara, that would be great. I just switched from my Zoom account to Karen's account, so that's why I'm having a trouble giving. I'm not a host anymore. I mean, technically on the Zoom, in the Zoom terms. Let me see if there is any other way. Kara, do you want to quickly email me your slides if you have it, so I can share my screen. I'm not sure if Karen is hearing us. She might be outside. Then I can share my screen, and then you can just tell me next slides if that's okay.
Yeah. Just give me a minute.
That's okay.
I've sent you my talk, but it might be a bit big because it's got a lot of photos.
Oh, okay.
Whoever the host is, if you just press down where it says participants, there's a little arrow, and it you should be able to tick a box that allows participants to screen share.
Yeah, I think Karen is.
Must be her kitties.
Yeah, she must be. Yeah. Or meanwhile, let me see if you. I haven't yet received your slide. So let's do this. While I'm. How about we switch the agenda? So while I'm waiting to receive Kara's email, it may take some time. It may ask to go through UNSW server, so there's a bit of a delay there as well. I already have Alessandro's slide, so thanks, Alessandro, for sending that just about an hour ago. So if you don't mind, my apologies, Kara, is that okay if we, just for the sake of time, if we switch to Alessandro and he does the presentation first, and then we can come back to Kara with hers. Actually, I can't share my screen either. Oh my goodness. It says it's disabled. Let me give Karen a call.
Miad?
Yes.
She's trying to do it now. It's just, it's frozen. So she's just trying to do it. So
okay.
Is there anyone that where we can just talk initially without the presentation?
Sure. How about, okay.
Thank
So how about we ask Kieran then? So Kieran, do you want to step in? Because I mean, we had a chat before about some of the work that you do on indigenous plants, and tell us a little bit more about the work you do and what everyone needs to know about what the right plant to what the right tree right tree is to plant.
well listen, Miad, I actually had a PowerPoint display as well, so
yeah.
But look, I'm happy to talk a bit off the cuff about certain subjects and about maybe a little bit further about what I have actually done. Yeah, I have worked as a landscape horticulturalist in Sydney for over 20 years, so I have some perspectives on, you know, the actual backyard, front yard sort of garden maintenance and plant choices and plant maintenance in that respect. But I've also worked with state forests and national parks in a cultural heritage capacity. So I suppose one of the things that I do here at the Cooks River Alliance is aligning the idea of what is Western science and how is it same but different to traditional cultural perspectives. So I've done a bit of work on water and soil health and trying to capacity share and create stories with some people I work with in here at the Cooks River Alliance with my Aboriginal working group. So there's some of the focuses that we're trying to do with working here in the actual. I actually also work for Landcare, so that's the other focus of what I'm doing is just trying to get people involved. And I use the term capacity sharing because I can appreciate that whatever I've studied and whatever I've experienced, it doesn't really make me better or worse than anyone. And, you know, we all have our own connection, our own story to tell, and our own part to play in relating to place. And in this case, you know, the city of Sydney or the city of Basin, the Sydney Basin, that is, you know, this is a place where we all live and reside and cohabitate. So, you know, we all have a part to play in this place.
So what do you think of, I mean, I'm still waiting for Karen to fix this. Sorry about that. What do you think of the current status of the planting or greening Sydney in terms of the type of the vegetation that are being used and the importance and the impact of having indigenous versus non-indigenous plants in place?
Is this another question for me?
Yes, that's a question for you, Kieran. Yes.
I think overall there's a perspective that can be garnered, and for me it starts with a historical sort of, you know, perspective and an understanding as to how and why that original vegetation disappeared through landscape choices that and land management choices that the colonisers made. But also, you know, with the I suppose the expansion of the Industrial Revolution and the pollutants that added to our built environments. And so when the choices were made in Sydney to start, you know, sort of planting street plants, it was using what was known to work. So the London plane tree, for argument's sake, that had worked in London in the very toxic sort of atmospheres that they had over there in the 1800s, late 1800s. So as for choices, yeah, we have endemic, we have native, we have exotic sort of species. I suppose overall we should be using plants that work, but within that there are flavors, and notionally the endemic or the native species are better suited to what we're trying to achieve with biodiversity outcomes. So, but I wouldn't preclude using exotic plantings myself because I like roses. So I have roses in my garden. So
thank you very much for that. I think I'm the host now. That's great. So thank you very much, Karen and Stefan, for helping that. So, and thank you, Kieran, for jumping in and helping me with the technical issue. So now, okay, let's go to Kara. Okay, a step back to the original plan. Let me make Kara a co-host. So I'm going to make you host, and then you can give it to Alessandro when it's done. Okay, so Kara should be able to share your screen now. Yes. Yay, it's coming. Excellent. And you're on mute, Kara, I guess.
Okay, so you can see this now?
Yes.
Okay,
and
great.
Can you make the display setting? We see the presenter style, so we see the two screens.
Cholera, I might have to hand to Ali. I don't know.
No, on the top, you see on the top, it says display settings.
On the top of. Oh, yes.
Yes. And just do, yes, excellent.
Better? Okay, great.
Yes. Okay.
So I'm quite conscious of time now, and I'll try and go really quickly for you all, just to give you the gist of the sorts of things that we've been doing research on and the kinds of outcomes that we're finding for biodiversity. And if anyone has any questions or wants to follow up on anything, please feel free to send me an email about any of this. So my email details are on the front here. So as I said before, I do research on biodiversity, urban biodiversity, and largely around how it responds to things that we're doing on the ground in terms of planting and other ways that we manage the landscape. So as I said before, my slides are going to move. Nope. Oh, there they are. A bit slow. Okay. As I said before, yeah, I'm in the lower Blue Mountains. So this is Darug country, and we love it here. It's wonderful. And we acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and all of the land on which the research that I'll talk about today was undertaken. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So most of the work that I'll talk about is from Sydney, but I have done a lot of work in Melbourne and other parts of the country. So as you all know, Sydney is very green. We're very lucky. But our luck could potentially run out if we don't manage our resources a little bit better. So Sydney and actually all Australian cities are critical places for urban biodiversity. We host hundreds of federally and state listed threatened species here. And Sydney, for example, is the only place where we find some threatened species like Grevillea kalei only occurs here. And we have the great pleasure of seeing things like the swift parrot come through the landscape because of the types of plants that we have here. But if we don't carefully manage these resources and start to plan better for these types of species, we're not going to see them stay here into the future. And so in my line of work, we really, there's a lot of acknowledgement of this fact that we're at a bit of a crossroads, and that the decisions we start to make now about planting and planning and urban design are really going to affect our trajectory going forward. So we know that nature is so beneficial for society. It supports our society, and we can choose to plan and design cities to include nature and realise all of the benefits it provides, or we can choose not to do that. But the challenge, I guess, is how do we do that? How do we accommodate nature in cities when we also need to accommodate an expanding human population? And how do we do it in a way that really supports biodiversity and allows it to thrive? And that's the sort of research that I've been doing. So I'll just present a couple of the projects and the kinds of outcomes that we're seeing. So the first project I'll talk about is one where we worked with the City of Sydney Council and did a baseline invertebrate or insect monitoring survey. So we went out and looked at all of the different invertebrates living in the different green spaces, their priority green spaces, and areas where they've been working, areas where they've been doing bush regeneration and things like that. And we're specifically looking for invertebrate diversity in terms of bees, butterflies, cicadas, and spiders. And so this was led by Professor Dita Hokulai at Sydney Uni and by Manuel Lequerica. And what they found is that Sydney's doing all right for being a CBD, having lots of concrete. All of the small kind of restoration patches that occur in different parts of the city, they're actually hosting really diverse invertebrate communities, which is really good. So it's places like the Reeve Edge patches along Orphan School Creek and the Eastern Suburbs Banksia Scrub in Sydney Park and some of the other region sites in Sydney Park. They all host significant diversity of these different focal groups that we were looking at. And we think it's because of the native plantings that are in there, and also because of the dense understory that is being provided. So I know that possibly today there'll be a lot of talk about canopy cover and trees, but I'm here to tell you, if you're an animal, it's all about what's underneath the trees. It's all about the understory and the ground cover. And the other thing that we're finding in a lot of this work, and Manuel's doing his entire PhD on invertebrates and how they're responding to vegetation in Sydney. And we're finding actually that it's not just about native plants, that a lot of exotic vegetation can provide a really supporting role to insects as well. So Manuel's doing his whole PhD on hoverflies, these little guys here. They kind of look like a cross between a bee and a fly. And I think they're like the mystery pollinator. These are like the secret pollinators that no one ever really realizes are there. But these guys are incredibly important in the ecosystem, and they do a lot of work for us when native bees aren't around. They're the main pollinator in winter, and we're finding that they are in greater numbers. So there's better hoverfly populations, and there's more species of them in places, in urban green spaces with lots and lots of flowers. And so those kinds of places, they do have native plants, but they also have a lot of exotic vegetation as well. And the exotic plants in those systems are just providing that extra bit of food, that extra bit of nectar resource that isn't there when native plants aren't in flower. So there is a role to play for some exotic species as well. And the last thing that all of our research points to is that vegetation structure is incredibly important. So when I say vegetation structure, I mean these patches of dense understory and ground covers. And in parks or in any other kind of green space or any kind of landscape that doesn't have an understory, you really don't get the full suite of biodiversity that you could. And so we see parks that have even small, tiny patches of understory. They seem to support a greater array of not only invertebrates, but all of the animals in the food web. So we've measured this for birds, for insectivorous bats, and for a huge range of different invertebrate groups. And these kind of very small, dense patches can be pretty easy to achieve. You might see no-mow zones popping up in different parts of the city, and I'm sure you possibly might have all seen the Gardening Australia segment that Costa did on the flowering meadow in the Royal Botanic Garden. So these kinds of flowering meadows, they're really visually appealing. They're a great way of engaging people with nature. And actually, even despite their small size and short flowering window, they're really great for a huge range of butterfly and bee species. And these are becoming really popular, a really popular tool to promote biodiversity in different places in cities. They're in Melbourne, they're in London. You see these things everywhere. They're going to become more and more important. So what I think our current kind of problem is that our policy setting is really high level, talks about lots and lots of trees, millions of trees across huge scales, but it really misses what we need, which is the really small scale support for very small scale initiatives. So big scale things like this are great. Lots of trees can be really important, as I'm sure Alessandro will tell you. But biodiversity needs a lot more than that. It needs understory and it needs ground covers at really, really small scales. And I think this is where our current kind of policy setting breaks down. There's not a lot of guidance at these really small scales. There's a few really great projects that are starting to come out around the country, and here's an example of two of them. But I don't think there's enough examples of best practice at these kinds of small scales, and ecologists and Indigenous peoples obviously often get left out at these kind of small scales. So there's these two examples from Melbourne, one of a biodiversity planting guide where the City of Melbourne engaged academics to come up with a plant list to help work out what kinds of plants can live in really, really harsh conditions, like on the sides of streets, in the middle of roundabouts and that kind of thing. What kind of native plants can we use that can also be really beneficial for biodiversity? And this is a publicly available plant list, and you can click through and sort of match it to your conditions. So that's a really great example, but it doesn't actually include Indigenous knowledge or anything to do with food plants or medicinal plants or anything like that, which is a shame. A project that came after that was this one run by Zena Kunston from the Clean Air and Urban Landscapes Hub, and she's since come up with an Indigenous plant guide, which sort of summarises all that extra information about the sorts of plants that people could easily put in their gardens and things like that, that are really beneficial for a huge range of reasons, including providing habitat So these two projects are really wonderful, but there's just not enough of them around. So the last project that I'll talk about is one where we went out and started doing some social science. So we started talking to practitioners about, all right, so we know that small scale initiatives are where it's at. That's what we need to get more of to support biodiversity. How do we go about doing it? How do we get these things done? And so we went and spoke to people all around the country who were at the coalface, people in these positions, to try and ask them about how to get more of this sort of stuff happening. And we took all of the information and also worked with Indigilab, who's an Indigenous consulting company in Sydney, to come up with some recommendations for practitioners about how to go about getting more of these small scale initiatives off the ground. And so what they recommended is that, well, what we were hearing is that small scale biodiversity projects are more successful when the organisation itself really values biodiversity and when there's a very strong policy framework that enables resources to go towards these kinds of projects, because often there is not. These kinds of projects are more successful when there's a very high level of community engagement and when the project from the outset is really inclusive of lots of different knowledge systems and cultures. And that is really reflected in this report that Indigilab put together for us. So all of these reports are actually publicly available on our NESP website, which is the Commonwealth funding program for the Clean Air and Urban Landscapes Research Hub. So the link's down the bottom. And in the Indigilab report, they were really reinforcing the fact that we need a strategy for this. There needs to be way more resources and better processes and protocols in place to better embed Indigenous engagement and Indigenous knowledge when these projects are being rolled out, and that people need to collaborate more, and there needs to be better facilitation of networks to bring together Indigenous and non-Indigenous experts in this space, because there's definitely not a lot. There was a lot of enthusiasm for it, but there wasn't a lot of actual evidence of projects getting up that sort of encapsulated these kinds of values. So just to summarize, all of our research suggests that very small scale initiatives are wonderful for biodiversity. Even tiny patches in terms of a few square meters can be really beneficial, particularly patches that are structured, have understory and ground cover, and have a mix of native and exotic plant species. But for any of this to actually work on the ground and for projects to get up in the first place, we really need to have better partnerships and cross-sector sort of networks that include different community groups, scientists, and a range of practitioners. And that is all I have for you. So thank you for the invitation. And if anyone has any questions or wants any of those reports that I mentioned, feel free to send me an email. Yeah, I'm happy to hear from you.
That was great. Thank you very much. I mean, very interesting insights. I mean, I'm not really an ecologist, so I didn't really know much about the importance of these small patches and also the ground cover as much as we talk about the canopy in the air. So that was great to know. Just for the sake of time, sorry about we lost a few minutes at the beginning. How about we keep the questions till the end and we ask Alessandro to continue with the presentation. So Cara, if you can make Alessandro host, you are now the host.
I think you should be able to screen share. Is that right, Ali?
Here we go.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
So just give me a second. Oops. Sorry, need to move the Zoom thing out of my way. Hopefully you can see this. So
yes.
Thank you for having me. So I'm talking to you from Darug Nation. And today I'm gonna talk a bit about a concept that might be useful for our conversation, which is about nature-based solutions, essentially building on what Cara said, but focusing more on vegetation, which is what I'm studying. I'm an urban ecologist by training, and I spent the last few years working in Australia and internationally on these issues. So we know that we have a problem, do we? Australia is getting really, really hot. This is an example of what happened just a couple of years ago before COVID hit us, where Western Sydney was actually the hottest place on the planet. We reached a whopping temperature of 48.9 degrees Celsius, and we are predicting that soon we will reach the critical threshold of 50 degrees. So the question is, how are we going to be surviving in these temperatures, and considering that also drought might be a significant problem. So we have an issue, which is, of course, the fact that these events are extremes, but they are becoming chronic. In 2020 summer, 2019, 2020 summer, 70% of days were above 30 degrees Celsius. And the question is not, whether we have climate change, is how we're going to be adapting to climate change, because climate change is already here. And this is true for both our urban nature and ourselves as people. This is an example from the damage that extreme heat and extreme drought can cause to our urban forests. This is an example of an oak tree in Penrith during that particular extreme weather event. Our group took the streets during extreme summer, and actually we counted the damage of about 5,000 trees in Penrith. As you can see from this graph, the top of species are the most affected by extreme temperature and drought. And as you can notice here, most of the species with the asterisks are exotic species to Australia. So most of the exotic species were actually significantly damaged by these couple of months of extreme events. So if we were to replace all the tree species that we observed as being damaged in Penrith, the cost that Penrith City Council will need to face is more than $1 million. This is for a single weather event, and is only for street trees of just a fraction of the land managed by the council. So this is an economic cost, it's a social cost that we'll need to face. It's good to know that indigenous and native species were just fine under almost 50 degrees Celsius. So the question now is to understand what we need to pick. Of course, we have a legacy. I guess Kieran was saying before that, we are in a country that was occupied, and our colonizers thought that the plants that we're bringing here were just fine. They grow well. The elms were doing fine. This is 100 years ago of this particular example in Western Sydney, Campbelltown, where this tree, in this picture was doing okay. Of course, these people didn't know anything about climate change, but it means that these old solutions are not suited for our new urban landscapes anymore. Another issue we have in Sydney, if we go from east to west, is that we have an unequal diversity in the urban forest. Here, an example of the street tree species and richness. As you can see downtown in the CBD, we have areas like Inner West or North Sydney with up to 35, 40 species per square kilometer. Whereas in the middle of, Parramatta and in the west in Penrith, the diversity that people can actually observe is really, really low, 1 to 4 species. This is unequal. We need to redress this issue somehow. And one critical issue I want to raise right now here, building on what Cara before, we look at the scale, Cara looked at the small scale, I'm looking at the larger scale. We can't afford to treat Sydney as a separate collection of different LGAs and different entities. We need a metropolitan strategy. We need metropolitan level integrated solutions, because this is a greater metropolitan area. We need to acknowledge the localities and the local peculiarities of different sections of the city in different areas, but we need to treat the city holistically. We need an integrated strategy. Why nature-based solutions? Because nature is the glue that keeps everything together, keeps the city functioning. Of course, we have technical solutions. It's hot. We can paint streets and roofs white, and it's okay. Of course, we have social solutions. Yes, we can dip our feet when, in water when it's too hot. We can use air conditioning as much as we want and all of that. But then we have nature on our side. And if we know how to simply integrate this solution, nature-based, technical, and social, is where the low-hanging fruit is. This is where the next challenge, both in research and practice, lies. So I'm going to show you just 4 examples of projects that are currently running. And hopefully they can frame the discussion. They can help framing the discussion later on. Which Plan Where is a project that has been funded by several entities on top, particularly Haute Innovation. And we spent the last 5 years, really screening the entire horticultural flora that is available for people to buy in our nurseries across the country to understand what's the climatic suitability of every single species and cultivar that is commercially available. Here, an example of this tool, how it's looking like. Angophora costata, if you're in Sydney, eventually you'll be able to log in for Sydney, and the tool is telling you that in 2030, 2050, and 2070, based on our climatic projection of climate change, this species is going to be totally fine in Sydney. And we have more of this number of species. We're going to be launching this tool in spring. And hopefully this tool is going to be helping all the practitioners, landscape architects, government agencies, state government, to screen out all the species that we know they're available under climate change, and we can't afford to plant them anymore. Another thing we are doing is actually leveraging the power of big data and artificial intelligence to help Sydney Water, for instance, to understand which tree species out of the 651 tree species that live in Sydney. We have a beautiful diversity in Sydney, even though it's uneven. Which one of these tree species are most likely to disrupt the underground infrastructures? So this is an example of fig trees intruding their roots in the pipes. And with artificial intelligence, we are able to pinpoint some of the species that are more problematic. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't use in the urban landscape. We just need to learn how to use that nature to be able to get the benefits out of them. We need to, for example, preventatively irrigate these trees in a way that they don't need to intrude the pipes simply because they have enough superficial water they can access. So we are helping Sydney Water to solve this problem that is costing them about $10 million per year across the entire Greater Sydney area. We're also helping Strathfield under the greening our city strategies and priorities to try to understand in this very polluted area around the New South Wales port area, which tree species can actually help capturing pollutants on their leaves. So we have 15 species that have been planted in a park, like in this case, and also along the very heavily trafficked roads. And now in the next year and a half, we're going to be sampling leaves and their pollutants to try to understand what are the traits of these species that are most useful for us to capture and clean our air. And then finally, an example that I'm actually taking from work that we did in Adelaide, but it's very, very much applicable to Sydney as well. And is very much applicable to the fact that I love backyards and front yards. This is what I'm spending quite a lot of time for my research. And in Adelaide, we flew an aircraft during an heat wave in 2017. And we were able to measure the temperature of the skin of the city. And as you can see here in the blue areas, mostly they are footprints of trees. Every single tree has a much lower temperature compared to the rooftops or compared to the roads and all of that. So the trees are the solution to cool off our landscape at a large scale. Beyond what Cara said before, the small scale is very important for example, for biodiversity. The large scale is very, very important for how the city is functioning in terms of temperatures. So in the backyards, we found that the larger the backyard cover is in these suburbs, the more canopy cover you have. So we need to give our trees and our animals too the space that they need. Nature needs space. If we don't build our city in the right way, they can't live there. In Adelaide, 20% of urban land still is made up by yards, and yards can reduce urban heat by 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. So they have the best chance that we have to adapt to climate change right next door where we need the most, which is our home. So now I'm just going to leave it to you. I'm just going to leave it here. Which one is your great Australian dream? I know my answer. I don't know yours. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Very interesting talk. Lots of insights, and it quite complements with what Cara was saying. Kieran, do you want to jump in? And I mean, there were a couple of comments that both Alessandro and Cara made on the indigenous versus exotic plants and the canopy level, the ground level. What are your thoughts? What is your experience with some of these aspects?
Look, that's the nuts and bolts of Ecology 101. Could I perhaps just share a picture?
Yes, Alessandro, do you mind giving Kieran a...
I've just got to find it. Sorry, people.
That's okay.
Oh, my Lord. Listen, let's just keep this talkative, and we don't need any more pictures. Time's pressing. When we're looking at environments, there's a cultural view of the environment, and people have talked about overstory, midstory, understory, and the importance of that. So, so within our ways, that's grandmother, mother, daughter, yeah. And we can turn that around, so it's even underneath that relationship. So it's the soil itself, the O horizon, the A and the B horizon. That's daughter as well. The regolith is mother, and our bedrock is grandmother. So we have this relationship within landscape as to how we're looking at things. But so just within that thing of biodiversity, we're looking at simple concepts of species per square meter. And so if you're interested in taking that on board in your home life, I mean, that's the sort of measure we're sort of looking at. But it does start with soil, and so the biodiversity within our soil. When I went to school and studied soils, it was all soil chemistry and physics. But soil biology has been a big part of soil science in the last 15 years or so. And this is where we're seeing the diversity. And that's why you might look for something that's not a monoculture. You might look for mass plantings. You might look for, more plantings per square meter. And you see what's happening between these plants is because plants sequester carbon through carbon exudes. They exude carbon into the soil to feed these soil microbes. And they actually also have a trading mechanism between each species. So this is why we might look for species diversification in terms of our ground coverage and our understories. And it's very important. We should look after our children. We should look after our daughters. And I think that's kind of what I might like to add to that perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was great. I mean, let's open up to the audience if there are questions. Danielle is asking about Alessandro's work. I mean, if you search, I think most of this, Alessandro, can you correct me if I'm wrong? Most of your work should be available on the Which Plants Where website. Is that right? Or did we lose Alessandro?
Sorry, my internet dropped off.
No, that's okay. No, there was a question about how people can access some of your work. Is it available on your website, the Which Plants Where? Is that right?
Yeah, Which Plant Where is going to be live. I think in October we are doing the beta testing with a bunch of beta testers nationally. And as soon as Auto Innovation approves it, we're going to launch it.
Okay, excellent, cool, great. So if so the floor is open for some of the attendees if they have any question. I think, let me see if there was any question before.
I have a question, Miad. I've got my hand up. Sorry. Hello, hi everyone, I'm Karen. I was just wondering for the speakers what their thoughts are on, I know everyone brings it up, but plane trees, London plane trees. I would love you to share your thoughts on that. It seems to be the de facto choice of tree within the city of Sydney. Could you talk to us about what you think about plane trees? Thanks.
Oh, they're a bit plain.
Good joke. Well, the issue is that we can't remove them, that they are in the ground now. So most of the councils across Australia, they have replacement strategies. So we can simply replace them as soon as they mature and become too expensive to be planted. The issue is to try to understand which species we should be planted instead. Some avenues that are historical, I guess, they are pretty much monocultures, and we are trying to convince many people, some of them even in this Zoom meeting, to embrace. It doesn't matter whether it looks beautiful in road paved with one single species, and Cara is going to back me up. Is offering much more opportunity in terms of diversity of, for example, birds, I guess.
Thank you very much. Is there anything you want to add to that, Cara, or should I go to another question?
I'll go to another question. I didn't catch the end of Ali's comment because of his internet.
Sorry, my internet.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I was just wondering, Cara, if you do have thoughts on plane trees, because as Alessandro was saying, for example, I know in Melbourne that they're replacing all of those plane trees. What are your thoughts? The City of Sydney and its greening strategy has not specified removing, they're going to continue to plant the plane trees. So I just would like to know what you think about that from your perspective.
Yeah. So in another project that I didn't talk about, we were measuring the impact of the plane tree removal in Melbourne. And so they, at the moment, it depends on how they've been treated. They can, in terms of like invertebrate pests, they control them by injecting into the stem a lot of the time. And so a lot of these kinds of trees, they provide great structure. Some of them are old and have hollows, which can be really good for birds. But in terms of invertebrates, if they've been treated with insecticides historically, then they're kind of lifeless. So yeah, I think they're good for canopy cover and shade, but I don't know how great they are for biodiversity. And the main impact of their loss would be the loss of the structure in the landscape, not anything to do with the sorts of food resources that they provide, because I don't think they provide very much food resource for very many animals. Yeah. So it's very dependent on the type of animal or biodiversity group that you're interested in knowing about. So there's some pretty different kinds of impacts, which is sort of why we would suggest a diverse strategy for what you should be replacing them with, rather than one particular tree species. A range of different plant species would be better to cater for the different kinds of needs of wildlife.
So, Cara, maybe on that, I mean, there were Alessandro mentioned a little bit about the heat waves and the impact of climate change on some of the vegetation. But have you studied or have you looked at the response of biodiversity to climate change? How would climate change affect vegetation, and then as a result affect biodiversity in Australia?
No, I haven't directly studied that. I think there's a lot of sort of correlations, but not a lot of direct evidence sort of linking those things. The things that we tend to focus on are artificial habitats and how hot they get. So nest boxes and things like that, they definitely heat up in parts of the city where they're being put out. So they're pretty dangerous things to turn to. So when I think about climate change and wildlife, I guess trees are one of our main defenses to help them out. You'll see flying foxes falling out of the sky, falling out of trees in heat waves, and they need humidity and canopy cover. So we're not going to get that with planting new small seedlings. What we need to do is have rigorous sort of regulations and legislation that protect existing trees, no matter their identity, no matter their status, whether they're a threatened species or not. We need to sort of protect every standing tree in the ground right now is such a biological asset in terms of climate change, in terms of protecting animals from heat, extreme heat.
Mm-hmm. Great. There are a couple of more general questions in the chat box. Maybe it might be more suitable for Kieran if you can have a look. There's a question, I mean, it's a very general question that every family may have. It says, what can households be doing in terms of soil health for the purpose of contributing to the overall health of the urban forest?
The simple answer to that is mulch, and just keep mulching. It's pure and simple. It's you add carbon to the soil, and because there's relationships between this soil carbon and what's going on is it's not just about carbon emissions in the atmosphere. It's actually what we've done with the hydrosphere. So this mention of plane trees, I think, is an interesting example of, or a segue into the idea that it's not just what we're planting, but it's also how we're managing things in essentially what is a built environment. In cities, we live in you know, an anthropomorphic setting. And so, yes, we can plant a tree. It's going to senesce one day. So, you know, what do we take? So as an urban horticulturalist, I can tell you that's my big bugbear with landscape architects. They tell us to put these plants in, but they don't tell us anything about managing them in the longer term. So I think some silviculture in urban sort of forestry settings is overall very necessary. And it's just another bugbear of mine with our general community. The people I used to work for in horticulture, they would spend, you know, $1 million on redoing a house, but 100 grand on redoing the garden. And so that's that thing where, what are we as a society prepared to invest in? Is it our natural, you know, planet's health? No, we're still taking from it. You know, we're I don't know, Earth Day came up the other day again, you know. So yeah, managing urban environments is more than just what trees we plant or what understories we put in. It's also how we manage these places.
There's also some mentions of some tree species in the comments. Maybe Alessandro can comment on that because it's related, or anyone who wants to comment on that. The Robinia and Jacaranda for wildlife and canopy, or the red cedar. I mean, I have no idea if
I'll talk about Robinia.
Okay.
You know, it's one of those elephant plant species because it on its first flush, it doesn't have prickles, but on its second flush, it does. But yeah, so I don't know if it's very useful for a Sydney. I hate it as a gardener. But Jacarandas are pretty.
Alessandro, do you know of, I mean, what are your thoughts of some of these species if you're still on and not cut off?
Well, Robinia and Jacaranda are both exotic. They are portable species, so they can be planted in small spaces. Tuna ciliata, that has been suggested as well, is a great native tree, but it's much, much larger. So the issue here is urban landscapes are very diverse. We go from green roofs to, you know, urban canyon downtown in the CBD to very large areas. And plants are very versatile. We have many, many plants for all these different environments. We need to do a much better job in terms of landscape architecture and design to be able to find the right species for the right places. And we have so many opportunities. In Australia, we have 20,000 species of plants. There is no discussion. We don't need exotic species. It's already here. Some of them are really challenging to grow. And Kieran, I guess, is gonna, you know, has a much better experience than me. But think about that only 5% of the endangered species in Australia are available in the horticultural market. That's a massive opportunity, not just for, nurseries and horticultural people, but even for us to learn, to bring our plants back in town and learn about them at the doorstep of our places. I just want to raise one thing, another example, just because I want to be a bit provocative. London has been declared the first national park city in the world, as you might know. I'm advising Adelaide, because they have a Green Adelaide strategy, that they want to make Adelaide as the second national park city in the world. What are we waiting for here, Sydney? Come on, be bold.
Yes.
I love that idea.
Yes, the whole Sydney Fish Markets area could turn into a green area rather than an overdevelopment, to be honest, in my opinion. But anyways, that was great. Thank you very much, everybody. I guess we're almost running out of time. So thank you very much, Cara, Alessandro, Kieran, and everyone else who joined us today. We learned a lot, and the session was recorded, if you notice, so it's going to go online on YouTube. So if anyone wanted to go back and have a look or send it to any friend or family who is interested to learn more about this topic, that would be great. So thank you very much. Have a lovely Friday evening and stay home weekend, and hope to see you in some of our next sessions. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.